April 9, 1865. The American Civil War is drawing to its long and bloody end. At Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, Confederate General Robert E. Lee is preparing to surrender the Army of Northern Virginia. For most soldiers, this day will mark the end of 4 years of suffering. But for one young officer, the war's final hours will become the most defining and devastating moment of his life. As the morning unfolds, scattered fighting still breaks out across the countryside. Amid the confusion rides a 19-year-old Confederate officer named Charlie Minnigerode. Though barely more than a boy, he serves as aide-de-camp to General Fitzhugh Lee, carrying messages and orders through collapsing lines. His uniform is neat, his posture disciplined, and his face betrays little fear. Yet fate is closing in fast. Without warning, a bullet strikes Charlie squarely in the chest. The force throws him violently from his horse. As he hits the ground, his head smashes against the earth, fracturing his skull. Pain floods his body, and blood quickly soaks into his uniform. The sounds of battle blur into distant echoes as his vision fades in and out. Around him, soldiers rush past, some retreating, others still firing, but none stop to help. General Fitzhugh Lee soon reaches the fallen officer and dismounts. He kneels beside Charlie and takes in the sight before him. One look at the wound is enough to convince him that his young aide will not survive. With enemy forces closing in and chaos spreading across the field, Lee has no choice. He mounts his horse again and rides on, leaving Charlie behind, alone and bleeding, on the final battlefield of the Confederacy. As the noise of battle drifts away, Charlie becomes painfully aware of the truth. He has been abandoned. He is certain he is dying. His strength fades, but his mind remains clear enough to grasp one final thought, that he will never see his family again. With trembling hands he reaches for a pencil, preparing to write what he believes will be his last words on earth. Long before the blood and chaos of Appomattox, Charlie Minnigerode's life began far from the battlefield. He was born into a respected and comfortable family in Richmond, Virginia, the son of a prominent Episcopal clergyman. His upbringing was shaped by faith, discipline, and education, and no one expected him to choose a life of war. Yet as the nation tore itself apart, the call of duty and youthful idealism proved stronger than comfort or caution. At just 16 years old, Charlie ran away from home to join the Confederate Army. Too young by official standards, he lied about his age and entered a world defined by hardship, violence, and loss. What he lacked in years, he made up for in determination and intelligence. Superiors quickly noticed his calm under pressure and his sharp mind, and he rose through the ranks with surprising speed. By the time he turned 19, Charlie had earned a position few achieved so young. He became aide-de-camp to General Fitzhugh Lee, one of the Confederacy's most respected cavalry commanders. The role placed him constantly at the center of danger, carrying orders through gunfire and chaos. He was trusted, capable, and fiercely loyal, a young officer shaped by war far faster than any boy should have been. Yet beneath the uniform and rank, Charlie was still a teenager who had sacrificed his youth for a cause that was now collapsing around him. The ideals that drove him to run away from home were about to be tested in the most brutal way possible. And on the final day of the war, all of that ambition, faith, and courage would be reduced to a single moment. One bullet, one fall, and a long wait for death. The bullet that struck Charlie Minnigerode did not come with warning or mercy. It tore into his chest with brutal force, stealing the breath from his lungs and shattering the rhythm of his heartbeat. Thrown violently from his horse, his body crashed to the ground as his head struck the earth, fracturing his skull. In an instant, the young officer who had carried orders with confidence and speed was reduced to a broken figure lying helpless in the dirt. Pain overwhelmed him, but he did not lose consciousness. Instead, he was left fully aware of every second of his suffering. The battlefield moved on without him. Soldiers ran past, boots thundering through the dust, eyes fixed forward, unwilling or unable to stop. Some glanced at his blood-soaked uniform and assumed he was already dead. Others simply did not care. As minutes stretched into what felt like hours, Charlie realized that no rescue was coming. The war he had given his youth to was ending, but it was ending without him. At one point, Union soldiers passed close enough for him to beg for help. One man cut a button from Charlie's uniform as a souvenir and walked away. Another officer listened as the wounded teenager pleaded for an end to his pain, or at least a pistol to finish it himself. The request was refused. Instead, he was told to pray. Each rejection drove the truth deeper into Charlie's mind. He had been abandoned by both armies, left alone between life and death on the last battlefield of the Civil War. As exhaustion and blood loss weakened his body, a chilling calm began to replace fear. If death was coming, he decided, it would find him prepared. With shaking hands, he reached for a pencil, knowing there was only one thing left he could do. He would write to his mother and say goodbye. Lying alone on the cold ground, surrounded by the distant sounds of a dying war, Charlie Minnigerode accepted what he believed was his fate. His body was failing, his strength nearly gone, yet his mind remained clear. With trembling hands, he pulled out a small pencil and paper. There were no dramatic words, no anger, no fear. What he wrote instead was calm, faithful, and heartbreakingly tender, a final letter to his mother. In his message, Charlie did not complain about his pain or curse the war that had brought him there. He spoke of surrender, not to the enemy but to God's will. He wrote that he was ready to die if that was what God had chosen for him. His greatest sorrow, he confessed, was not the loss of his own life, but the pain his death would cause those he loved most. Even as his blood soaked into the earth beneath him, his thoughts remained with his family, far away from the battlefield. After finishing the letter, Charlie carefully pinned it to his chest, over the very place where the bullet had struck him. It was a quiet act of hope that someone, someday, might find his words and carry them home. Around him, soldiers continued to pass by, indifferent to the young life fading at their feet. Time lost meaning. Pain and exhaustion pulled at his consciousness, and the edges of the world began to blur. With the letter secured and nothing left to do, Charlie closed his eyes and waited. Death felt close now, no longer frightening, just inevitable. The war that had defined his youth seemed to be slipping away with him. On the final day of the Civil War, a 19-year-old boy lay still on the battlefield, believing his story had reached its end. Just when death seemed inevitable, fate quietly changed its course. As the afternoon wore on and the battlefield grew strangely silent, a Federal surgeon moved among the wounded, searching for any sign of life left behind. Bodies lay scattered across the field, most beyond saving. Then he noticed Charlie Minnigerode. Bloodied, motionless and pale, the young Confederate officer appeared no different from the others. But a closer examination revealed something unexpected. Faint breathing, a fragile pulse, a chance. Against all odds, the surgeon believed Charlie might live. Orders were given, and the boy who had been left for dead was carefully lifted from the ground and carried to a field hospital. There, surrounded by pain, blood, and the groans of other wounded soldiers, Charlie clung to life. His injuries were severe, his survival uncertain, but death no longer had a firm grip on him. What had seemed like a final farewell only hours earlier was now the beginning of a long and difficult recovery. News of his survival came as a shock. He had been abandoned, ignored, and mourned before he was even gone. Yet somehow, on the very last day of the Civil War, Charlie Minnigerode survived. It was a miracle few would have believed possible, a life pulled back from the edge at the moment it should have ended. But while the war was now over, its hold on Charlie was far from finished. For the young officer, survival did not mean peace. The battlefield had released his body, but not his mind. The wounds he carried were not only physical, and the price of living through the war would reveal itself slowly. Over the years to come, Charlie Minnigerode survived the battlefield. But survival did not bring peace. After the war, he returned to civilian life, carrying wounds that could not be seen. He married, built a family, and became the father of 7 children, some of whom would later play meaningful roles in American public life. From the outside, his life appeared restored, even successful. Yet beneath that surface, the war lingered, shaping his thoughts, his emotions, and his sense of self long after the guns had fallen silent. The memories of Appomattox never truly left him. The moments of abandonment, the pain, the letter written for death, these experiences followed him through the years. Like many veterans of his generation, Charlie struggled with what today might be called the invisible wounds of war. Hardship, Financial strain and emotional isolation wore him down slowly. The boy who had once faced death with calm faith found himself fighting a quieter, lonelier battle at home. In 1888, at the age of 42, Charlie Minnigerode took his own life. He had survived the last day of the Civil War, only to be claimed years later by its shadow. His story did not end on the battlefield, but the war never truly released him. A photograph taken after the war shows Charlie wearing the same uniform he had worn at Appomattox. The bullet hole is still visible, dark stains of blood remain on the fabric. It is a haunting image, a silent witness to the day death nearly claimed him, and a reminder that for some, the war does not end when the fighting stops. Charlie Minnigerode lived when he should have died, and in that truth lies both the miracle and the tragedy of his life.